Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. If you are joining me live, this is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am here in the classroom. Why? Because I'm the teacher. That's the reason why of these classrooms. Just looking at a different way to bring you what I think is most important. I know everybody has their opinions about what we should be teaching and what we should be learning, but I have a PhD in psychology, and my PhD in psychology means I know a little bit something about learning, and I know something about teaching since I've been doing it for a long time. Let me start recording here since I did get some of my technology fixed, but apparently not all of my technology fixed because now I've got a little red light over there. So I'm on a little late today, and the reason why I'm on late is because I've been having technology problems today all day long. And in my classrooms, whoop, I just had some orange juice and I didn't swallow that the right way. In my classrooms, I've been saying all day today, if you are not being democratic in your own community, with your own family members, that kind of thing, then don't complain about the democracy that's going on broadly in this country. Because there's a lot of people locally who are trying to, in order to line their own pockets, and this is a national thing as well, right? In order to line their own pockets, they are oppressing other people. And that's not democracy. So I don't want to hear you complain about what's going on nationally, democratically, if you are not creating a democracy right in your own neighborhood and in your own community. And so that has been sort of my theme today, and getting all kinds of bad reception. And I've said it for my mysteries series. So watch my mystery series if you don't know what I'm talking about. But this is something that's been not going on just with me. It's going on all over. It's with technology. It's the way that they want to lead you in a particular direction, which is communism, which is fascism. And I'm saying locally, you can't complain about it if you're doing it to the local people. And there are a lot of people doing it locally here. So let's get going with our spiritual talk, though. So I want to say that I was going to have Moses in all day long. And with all the craziness, the schedule there probably says Moses in here, and it's like, not Moses. What in the world was I thinking? It's not Moses after Abraham. It is, who is our God? Our God is the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we can't jump to Moses without Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this helps us really remember sort of the order of, even though clearly I didn't remember, the order, clearly I did not remember, not clearly to you, clearly to me, I didn't remember the order of these important biblical figures, all right? So Noah, so Adam and Eve, and then Noah. The flood is right after Adam and Eve, all right? We have Cain and Abel in between there, right? We didn't talk about Cain and Abel. We barely talked about Adam and Eve. We did talk about Eve, how the snake beguiled her, right? So we did. The snake beguiled her. But not Cain and Abel. We didn't. Okay, so that will help us remember. So Adam and Eve, Noah, the flood. So we're taking care of prehistory, basically. And then history starts with Abraham. And so Abraham, and then the way to remember it is, who is our God? He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you know all of those come. And after Jacob comes Moses. And we'll show you how Moses comes after Jacob. Okay? All right. So that's where we are at today. We'll see how far along we get. So we are still in Genesis is where we are. So we haven't gotten the Exodus, the exit. We know the Exodus then is Moses, because they're exiting Israel. So we're going to give you some background. So there is our chronological order. And I think I don't actually have it. And so I'm going to go actually put it right there. And so that is from effectivechurchcom.com is where I got that from. So let me actually, I'm going to go ahead and edit that and put that in there. Okay, all right. I know you guys hate that, but it has been such a crazy day. I mean, it's been, cutting me off here, loading me back up in an entirely different management, whatever, manager, film manager, because I don't have a film manager. So it's just been, and cutting me off and not recording and all kinds of things. And it's upsetting because I really did, especially that Bookless classroom. I was on a roll. I was on a roll. Not like right now. I'm kind of, But if you heard all of Bookless classroom, you would know why I'm like that. And also talked about it in the critical thinking classroom. I think the same thing happened. It did. It cut me off. Excellent reception. Then all of a sudden, done. Just done. Okay. So thank you for the chronological order. That's one of the better ones. I've seen other chronological orders not like that. You got to break Genesis down. Genesis has to be broken down. If it's not broken down, it's not a good chronological order. If it starts with Genesis, not a good chronological order. That one is. Because Job absolutely has to be in one of the earliest books. And it is right after Noah. So there I've got the book of Job and the things that we were talking about. This is what I promised you I could not. And if you can't even believe it, I had the book right there the whole entire time. It's just I didn't recognize my scribblings. I thought my scribblings were like this, and they were all really actually nice and neat because I had a lot of things on 2 pages that I wrote. And these are all the things. So this is, if you remember, I read from my list. So this is directly from scripture. So when we were talking about Job, I read God's response to Job. And in God's response, he gave us a really good idea of his image. And so what I did was I jotted all those things down, as I told you I did. But I said I wanted you to listen to what I had to say as opposed to in the way that I had to say it, as opposed to reading them right from the PowerPoint. Well, now I put them on a PowerPoint for you. So you've got both. So you've heard my lecture kind of on it. And now there is a sort of a handout for it that shows us God's image. So I put them kind of in categories as I did it when I was jotting things down. So he laid the foundation of the earth, its measurements, the equator, nothing to hold it up in space. He also, the stars, laid the stars in their places. He made the seas, he shut them up. The clouds and the darkness he made to cover the seas, the waters. Mornings he made dawn. He gives light to darkness. Where does light start? Do you know, Job, where light starts? The mornings, the light change men. Light changes men, but not wicked people. In the next column, on water, he speaks of water. Springs begin. Do you know where the springs begin? Have you walked the deep, the gates of death? He calls the deep waters the gates of death. Do you know where rain begins? Do you know where thunder and lightning comes from? Do you know how to settle the wind? Do you know about the first dew, the first frost? And the frozen waters, the first frozen waters. As far as animals, do you know how to feed? He feeds and provides food and a sense for hunting, feathers for flying, for the soaring hawk, manes and strength for the horses, and shelter and water for his animals. The Leviathan, he tames them with a ring and a rope. He draws the Leviathan out with a fish hook and kills him with harpoons. Can you do those things? Can you set the birthing cycle or the cycle of life? Do you know where wisdom comes from? Do you know how great the numbers are of my days? And can you make a promise that will last forever? That is just, that last one. Can you make a promise that will last forever? Not a lifetime, not your lifetime, because those weren't the promises God made. He made promises that last forever, starting with the Abrahamic covenant, which we're going to look at again, I think a little bit more clear, because I always felt that they were running into one another. There were 4 promises in the Abrahamic covenant, and I really felt that they were running into one another. And you can see in the way that I sort of describe it that it really was running into one another, the way that I was describing it. But on the next page, I talk a little bit more about it because God reintroduces the covenant, reconfirms the covenant with Jacob. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. All right, so this is pretty much where we left off, but there was a lot of things that I wanted to talk about that I kind of missed. I've been thinking if I like this, going right to the Bible, highlighting the character straight through the Bible. It is not my forte. I do know a lot about the Bible. I've studied a lot. As far as God goes, theology, right? So across the board, spirituality, religion, Christianity, not as much about, Muslim religions or other religions, Shinto, those kinds of things I don't know as much about. So that's the reason why it's not necessarily, if I to take a really hard look in any kind of order is not really, like, I'm not that good at this kind of stuff. I am pretty good if we talk about any given topic and the interpretations, right, relative to what's in scripture. But to actually say, I'm going to go through every main character and then talk about them, yeah, no, it hasn't been really my thing. That really wasn't what I was doing. And so I am debating about whether or not I really like this. I talk about other topics. I've always talked psychologically because that is my, main thing. So I always talk psychologically and then brought the spiritual world into that, right? So always saying, hey, this is how our mind and our bodies work. Let's talk about how the spirit really does work in unison with the mind and the body, right? In order to make us really healthy. And as a measure of good health too, if our spirit, if our passions, if our spirits, if we have a good spirit, then we are in good health, right? So it's a great measure of good health as well. Okay, so I went to go grab a book and I decided to clean up instead. Just fold a book up is all I did. Okay, so I want to go a little bit back to talk a little bit about Abraham. So I've got the points there. I'm really not listing any new points. I don't think I've added any points. I did not. I decided I didn't add any points to the PowerPoint I put up there. So that is the same PowerPoint that we left off with yesterday. All right, so no new points there. And I didn't even, rectify the Abrahamic covenant there either to make it just a little bit more clear, at least for me, a little bit more clear. So that is the same slide I put up yesterday when we were talking about Abraham. But so I'm going to fill it in a little bit more, and I'm using my notes like I told you. These are the same notes you can get online if you go to Oak Point Church here in Southeast Michigan, and they have got notes. Bob Shyrock has done the Bible from Genesis to Revelations. It took him 6 years to do it. 6 years to do it. Not straight through, but nevertheless, still 6 years to talk about the Bible. Only pastor I've ever known to go straight through the Bible, exactly what I had been looking for in my whole life in church, and he did it. And not only that, but he also complemented it with 14 pages of notes approximately. His wife Shirley helped with that. 14 pages of notes for every single lecture. And I think there's something like 10 or 12 or maybe more lectures for Genesis alone, right? So multiply that by 14 and you really have got a lot of work. And Bob Shyrock is a PhD in theology, and has been teaching at a local seminar or seminary for a long time, and then the church, right? And then started the church. And so started the church and was successful in that church for 20 years. 20 years the pastor of that church, and started it. So I trust and it's really wonderful too, because he has a really intellectual mind about the whole topic. And so he talks about different arguments. Like one of the things that I didn't bring up that I could have and saw later on that he talked about was the arguments for I think it's the arguments for, I picked it up yesterday. I'll get it. Maybe not. Yes, I got it. The various ways of interpreting the creation account in Genesis 1. So here he's got, at the very beginning in his very first notes on Genesis, he has got 4 theories that are laid out. No, 5 theories that are laid out about the idea of Genesis. And so this is from theology, so very heady approach to it, like I said. But some of you might be interested in looking at this. So if you're wondering the reality of Genesis, what are the theological theories associated with it? Remember, we've been studying religion for forever, as long as we've known, right? Because the Bible is 4,000 years old at least, right? At least 4,000 years old. And so if we've been studying, as long as the history of man. Well, no, it'd be 4,000 BC, so it'd be 6,000 years old. Then the Bible would be 6,000 years old, right? Approximately, something like that. And so if you were interested in, and so theology, we've been studying it all that time. For 6,000 years, we've been studying the Bible, all right? Or forever, ever long, we found these, and Moses wrote it, as from what we understand, the Pentateuch, right? From what we believe is Pentateuch. So you're talking about Moses. So you're talking about the beginnings of time. Moses is 1500 BC, I think. Maybe Abraham is. Yeah, Abraham is 1500 BC. I got to get a timeline over here. And I will. I've got one, but it's really been a sporadic kind of thing to find it and put it into place. Yeah, I was going to talk about something else about that that came into my mind with attraction too. Same kind of thing. Like trying to get information in its place so that you have a better understanding of it. Doesn't even matter. Let's get to the theories over here, Annette. Oh my gosh. You don't sound like a doctor. You sound like a ding-dong. What? What did you say? Okay, so the theories, right? So theories on the beginning of time, on the beginning Genesis and creation. And so you can do a deep dive on this if you want to. The young earth theory, I'm not going to read these. So what I'm saying is the notes that Bob Shyrock has here go really into an intellectual depth on a college level. It really is on a college level. So here, just as an example, so the different earth theories, creation theories that are out there. The young earth theory, the day age theory, the gap theory, the rune recreation theory, rune, R-U-I-N, recreation theory, and then the framework theory. All right. So the point again here is that if you go to those notes and get those notes online from Oak Point, I also have got links to every single video on my my YouTube channel. So if you go to my playlist, you'll find in my playlist the entire Bible, and then that will give you links to, you'll be able to discover or find it links easily to all of the notes that I have. And these are only 1/4 of the notes. This is only gone through Old Testament to Kings is all these notes are. So there's like 3 more books of this, or 2 more books at least. Okay, so what I want to go to is and fill in. So like I said, what I want to do is fill in Abraham a little bit here for you, all right? So God said to Abraham, so this is Genesis 15, chapter 15, verse 13 through 16. So this is what God is setting Abraham up for. remember, he asked Abraham to leave his country, his homeland, which was an ungodly place. Leave his homeland and now set up a people for God, right? So that we can discover him through his people. God is realizing that his people, his creation, can't discover him surrounded by ungodliness. So what he needs to find are some godly people, pull them out of the ungodliness, train them, right, through a period of time so that we can be the example. So that his chosen people could be the example. They, the Israelites, could be the example. And so he's setting Abraham up with this. He's saying, come out of Ur, come out of Haran, and into the land of Canaan. Now the land, you'll see Jacob lays his head on the land. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? Jacob lays his head on the land. We'll see that today. But they don't get the land for 400 years. Why? Why don't they get the land for 400 years? Because if you remember, Ham sinned against Noah. Ham's youngest son sinned against Noah. You could do a deeper dive into that. That really was some sexual promiscuity that was on the incestual level, it looks like. And Noah got drunk and something occurred that should not have occurred. And it's in the Bible. In the Bible, if you're looking for blatant sex, you're not going to find it. It is all disguised in words like beguiled, right? And cursed and laid with, those kinds of things, right? And covered up. So those words. So you would not find blatant sexuality in the Bible. But how could the Bible not have the sin of sex all the way throughout? It has to, because that is the sin of the flesh. The ultimate sin of the flesh is sex. And if we're talking about a battle between good and evil, we are talking about the battle between the flesh, which is stated clearly exactly that way, the flesh and something outside, something beyond our flesh. So certainly the sin of the body, of the flesh, is sex, right? Any kind of alternative to that is all within the same realm, sex. That's what they're talking about, right? Sin of the body, sin of the flesh is sex. We have no greater drive because it's all part of procreation. So scientifically, spiritually, intellectually, we all get it. That's the bottom line. But again, if you go and you do a search, because I did as a young girl, where's the sex stuff in the Bible? You're not going to really find it. It really seems to be boring. It's all hidden there, but it's there. So there was a great sin. You can do a deep dive on the sin and come out with your theological explanations of what Ham's sin really was. But what God did was he cursed Ham's son, Canaan. And this is the land of Canaan that they are given. So this is, Abraham is given the land of Canaan, but not for 400 years. And the reason why is because, as we said, the only sin of the Canaanites is not just the sin of Ham. The sin of the Canaanites was much greater, including, as I said yesterday, things like human sacrifice. And as we travel through the Bible, we find that they did not destroy all of the ites, Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, that were all partaking in this kind of human sacrifice. God said, when you come into the land, you're going to destroy them. I'm going to give them 400 years to turn this around. But I know their hearts, and they're not going to turn it around. So in 400 years, I'm going to give you this land that I promised. And that's when Moses, later on, takes his people, the Israelites, into the promised land. But that's not for 400 years. He makes a covenant with Abraham. I will give you that land, but not your people will come back to it in 400 years. So this is what he says in Genesis 15, chapter 15, 13 through 16. God said to Abram, because remember, he hadn't given him the name Abraham yet. God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. They're going to be foreigners. And this teaches us, and there's a prayer that is, I think it was Moses, some prayer about treating us and remembering to treat people as if they are foreigners, because they were always, until 1946, the Israelites were always foreigners in a land, always. Since Abraham left Ur until 1946, the Jewish people, the Israelites, were always foreigners. This is the reason, this is such a huge lesson about God, what God is teaching us about how we have to treat foreigners in our country, because every year for thousands of years until, 75 years ago, the Israelites had to depend on the kindness of other nations because they were always foreigners. Good thing to know, isn't it? Your people, God, if you're a godly person, you need to know that God's chosen people were always foreigners until 1946. And if they don't live in Israel, then they're still foreigners, right? And many of them don't. They're spread all over the earth, as was the prophecy, right? Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. There it is. And 400 years, they are going to be strangers in land and oppressed there. Egypt enslaved the Israelites for 400 years. And the date is known, and it was prophesied as well, how many years it would be. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, but I will also judge the nation whom they will serve. So he will judge Egypt. He will judge the Canaanites. He says it right here. But I will also judge a nation whom they serve. And afterwards they will come out with many possessions. And they did. They came out of Egypt with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. He's talking to Abraham. Then in the fourth generation, they will return here to Canaan. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. The iniquity, the injustices of the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, all the injustices, the payment for that is not yet complete. 400 years of those injustices. And then there is the retribution after 400 years. Okay? So, in summary of that, there will be oppression in a foreign land for 400 years. God will deliver the Israelites mightily from the oppression in the Exodus. Abraham will live a long life and die in peace after 175 years, actually. And 4 generations, Abram's offspring will occupy the land again. That's a land of Canaan. The sin of the Amorites, who are the Canaanites, had not yet reached the full measure that would move God to evict them from their land. The sin of the Canaanites had not yet reached the full measure that would move God to evict them from their land. And that's what happened when Joshua came in after Moses and took the land. So the fierceness of the Old Testament God that we think about, right, coming in there and taking land, he took it from a people that he gave 400 years to repent and wouldn't from their human sacrifice. And culturally speaking, because I looked into the history of this, why were they sacrificing humans? Because they believed from their sun god that that sun would go out. And this is so extraordinary when you think about light, and Jesus is the light, and that the promise is that all you have to do is believe in him and the sun won't go out and you won't die. But they had to sacrifice because the belief was so deep. And what if we didn't? And what if we didn't? What if one day we decided it's not right to sacrifice people, and then the promise of the sun going out came true, there, how do you get the sun back? Right? And so you can see how you could create enemies and then take the enemies then and put them in the volcano. You could see at first heroic, or in the fire, whatever, offer as a sacrifice, which was likely in a volcano. Or you could see how brave individuals, they were mostly, sacrifices were mostly men, is what I looked up historically in my Aztec book. So mostly they were sacrificing men. Why? Because it would look heroic for you to do that. I am somebody who's willing to die so that for everybody else, so that the sun doesn't go out. I mean, when you take a look at the associations with Christ and with this idea, you're like, well, everybody had a savior to not put the sun out, or savior to save everybody, right? To save everybody. Every culture had it. But no, you can see an evolution in the concept, because God had to put it like, all right, stop this nonsense with your polytheism, right? There's one God. So let me get my people, and I'm going to show you the power of one God. And that's what he's doing with the Israelites. He's getting his people together under Abraham. And he's telling Abraham, this is what's going to happen with the people, right? With my people. It's going to take 400 years, but then we're going to start the march to show everybody the glory of the one true creator. God is laying the foundation with Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob. All right? So there is the promise again. Now, to clarify, so 13 years before, so there's the promise then also that Abraham would bear a son, right? And so 13 years before Isaac was born, the promise was made. Actually, I don't know. It was at least that, because Ishmael was, well, it does say 13 more years passed, and still no firstborn for Abram and Sarai. So 12 years, Ishmael was 12, I think it was, around there when Isaac was born. So Sarai suggests Abraham gets her servant Hagar pregnant. He does, and of course, Sarai is very upset, right? She can't live with the woman. And by the way, she would carry the baby around, Ishmael around, and be like, ha ha, hee, look what I have, and look what you don't have. So Sarah sent Hagar away. Well, God felt sorry for her, had mercy on her, because of course it's not her fault what's going on, and made it okay for Hagar and Ishmael to live and be raised there. So that's what I said. But then 13 years later, Isaac came, and no longer could they have Ishmael in the house. So that's when they sent Hagar and Ishmael east, and so this is, and then they were separated. The last thing that they talk about, so here, oops, it's not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. Oh no, this is it. So here, Ishmael and Isaac, 12 sons. Ishmael had 12 sons. There are 7 verses given to these tribes. Now this is very interesting, because Isaac had 12 sons as well. And then, and the rest of the Bible is dedicated to the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. So you've got a mirror image of what is going on to the east of where we're talking about, right? So here we've got where Abraham sacrifices Isaac in the land of Canaan. So that's in the land of Canaan. If you look at the bottom right there, the dot that is all the way to the right, that is right? And then if you look at the dot in the corner map, that's in the right-hand corner map. If you look at the dot that's near the center of the map that's in the corner right there, that's Mount Sinai. So that's where Moses saw the burning bush, right? But in the main map that I have there, what that is Mount Moriah. It's now called Mount Zion, and that is the place where Abraham sacrifices his son Isaac. So that is the land of Canaan, but they were taken out of the land of Canaan and brought to Egypt. You can see Egypt is then to the west of, the Sinai Peninsula. Right there, and right there is a Sinai Peninsula. It's a peninsula. Why? Because it's surrounded by water on three sides. On the one side, on the west side to the left is Egypt, and then on the east side to the right, oops, wrong way. On the east side to the right here, that is the Middle East. We're getting into the Middle East area there. All right, so more into, Saudi Arabia, those kinds of, in Iran. Remember that in the bottom right-hand corner map there, all the way over here, in that bottom right map, that's where is. And remember, that was also the Tower of Babel. That's where Abraham left. The ungodly place. That's the ungodly place that Abraham left. Okay, all right. So, going back here then to Ishmael, once Ishmael is sent away to the Middle East, right, further east, we don't hear anything else about him. We're going to talk about we do hear something about his descendants coming up, and we'll say something about that in just a minute, all right? 7 verses are given to Ishmael's 12 tribes. Abraham makes plans for Isaac to marry a woman from the homeland via a servant. All right. So this is very interesting because the entire time what is going on here is don't mix with ungodly people. We want to keep the Israelites as pure as we can. Whenever we have one godly person in the midst of all these ungodly people, it is very difficult to find the example. So God wants to separate his people to set them up as an example, not because they're better than anybody else. We clearly see from their sins they weren't. He just needs to separate some people from the ungodly people and try and keep them separated as best that they can. But we will see throughout the time and ages, it was very difficult to keep them separated. Solomon took many wives, 700 wives, I think it was. David had a huge concubine as well. Even though they loved probably only one of them really a lot, right? Or really cared for only one or two, whatever. One of them maybe, I don't even know, right? And the women that they would take would have idols, right? They would practice because they were of esteem usually, right? They were of the upper echelon of people, right? The higher class. Solomon, a king, would not be with lower class women. He would be with higher class women. Well, these higher class women had lots of knowledge about the gods and about how to pray and what you're supposed to offer and all those kinds of things that they were taught, right? Because that was the education of the women. So they knew all those things. So how, when you have a deep belief in your heart that there's a God there who will do these things for you, right? Do you abandon those beliefs? So that was always God's problem with people, is they would intermingle and he couldn't keep a good example separated. So Abraham understood this. And so when he went to find a wife for Isaac, he sent a servant to Ur. God said, never return to the homeland, but he needed a wife that was from his ancestry, right? That was an Israelite. That wasn't a Moab or a Canaanite, but that was an Israelite. And so in order to do that, the servant had to go back to Ur. They didn't want Isaac to go to Ur and get caught up in the ungodliness. All right. What we find is, so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we find that Isaac and Rebekah did not take the same safety precautions with Jacob. And the consequences with Jacob was he went to the ungodly land and got caught up in ungodliness. All right. Not so bad. He's a child of God and God promised to protect him, and he did. But you can see then by and this is what it said, by the second generation, they began falling away from the hardcore laws that kept them separate from the ungodliness. Didn't make them better, just kept them separate so we could see visually with our eyeballs a better example, right? Or I suppose with words in our imagination, not necessarily with our eyeballs. I've never met Jacob, have you? I don't know. All right, so Abraham plans for Isaac to marry a woman from the homeland, which is Ur, but he sends a servant to go find that person that Jacob could marry. Okay? Or I'm sorry, that Isaac could marry. Isaac sees Rebekah, so the servant brings back Rebekah from the land of Ur, brings Rebekah to Canaan. And Isaac sees Rebekah, and there's love at first sight. She was barren, but they prayed for a baby, and Rebekah gives birth to twins, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob means supplanter, is what that means. So Jacob's name means supplanter. Esau was the oldest of the twins. He was coming out first. There was a foot. Esau's foot came out. The story has it that Jacob literally grabbed his foot and brought it back in, and Jacob came out first. And this all has to do with culture, right? Cultural laws and mores or norms. And what it was is that the oldest offspring gets all of the blessings and the rights to the fortune, the family fortune. The oldest offspring does. So when there's twins, it would be the firstborn of the twin. Well, Esau, with his foot out, was considered firstborn. Jacob grabbed the heel, supplanter, heel grabber, literally heel grabber. And then Jacob comes out first. So secondborn is first, and that's literally what scripture says, that the second will serve the first. And this is what starts the lifelong battle that we've seen between the Middle East and basically Western Christianity. We see it right here in the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We'll see it come out a little bit more as we see what happens with Jacob. Okay, so let's see here. So 13 years pass and they give birth to Isaac when I think Sarah was 91 and Abraham was something like 101, something like that. It's probably here and I'll probably come across it. Okay. One other thing that occurred here that I didn't talk about is, so now we're going to get to still a little bit about, actually this is about Abraham. Is that in this covenant, to keep the covenant, there was always something that somebody had to do to keep the covenant. So God would ask something of somebody in order to keep a covenant with them. And I'm not going to get this right, so I'm not going to say it. But with Abraham, what he said, what he wanted were all the descendants to be circumcised. So circumcision of Christians started with Abraham, and it was to recognize them. He marked his people. Remember, he didn't want his people intermingling with ungodliness. And apparently, the best way to be sure that that wasn't occurring was circumcision. So, as part of kind of like if you were to make a pact with somebody and you were just like to prick your finger and then like and they would prick their finger and then you would do something like that. I don't know if anyone ever does that anymore with all the stuff with blood going on. But it would be like this. You make a pact, but in order to make a pact and keep the pact, you have to do something to seal the promise. And that was the seal for the promise. So circumcision for all Jews was required as part of the covenant to say, yes, you get these rewards. How do I know you are the offspring? Because you're marked, and you're marked in a pretty, it's not something somebody could just go, right? No, you're marked, and that's a commitment, and that is a commitment, right? Especially because every person had to be circumcised, and most of those individuals were adults, right? So that is a real commitment, but it's also a mark. Okay. Then I have up there about, so I am covering some more. I did of in-depth things. I went on to Ishmael a little bit because he was born, and then I talked about him, but we'll get back to this. So we see that that there still is, even within Abraham's family, a lot of ungodliness in his nephew Lot, for example. And so Lot's parents died, and so Abraham was taking care of Lot. Lot took the more fertile land, if you remember, right? Abraham says, here's our land of Canaan. You take half and I'll take half and we'll separate ways, right? Well, then he got himself in trouble. Lot got himself in trouble in Sodom and Gomorrah. So, because that was another place of ungodliness. And so God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is important because I have Sodom and Gomorrah up there. I don't think I have that on there. I should, though. I didn't put that on there. And because the important thing about Sodom and Gomorrah to me is that Abraham pleaded for the lives of people there. He said, once Abraham realizes God's intention to bring judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah, he intercedes on behalf of the righteous remnant that dwell there. Surely he has in mind Lot, his nephew, and Lot's family who had previously settled in Sodom. Abraham asked God, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? If there are 50 righteous, no. If there are 45 righteous, God says, no, I won't sweep them away. If there are 45 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, I will not sweep them away. How about 40? No, I won't. How about 30? No, I won't. How about 20? So Abraham literally is bartering with God. And then he said, how about 10? If there are just 10, and God said, no. And what God ended up sparing were 4 people. Lot, his wife, and Lot's 2 children. And Lot's wife turned back and turned to a pillar of salt because they were told not to look back on the burning ungodliness. Because it's looking on it at longingly is what you do. I'm sad. I'm sad that I'm missing. What about my things that are there, right? So that was the reason why God was looking for them to not have a desire to go back to the ungodliness. All right, so that's Sodom and Gomorrah, and that is Lot's wife turns to a pillar of salt. But Abraham pleads for good people, and God recognizes his heart and actually literally debates with Abraham. And I just really like that a lot. It just shows the flexibility of God. We think of God as being, especially in the Old Testament, as being so inflexible. And I just really like the flexibility. So with his children that he is closest to, getting them started, he had a real close relationship with them. You could see, like, talking and bartering with them to get this thing right for the people since Noah. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting the way God is working for us. Okay, but with again, we see this ungodliness continue to creep in. Lot's daughter has sex with Lot in order to conceive a child because everyone was destroyed in Sodom and Gomorrah, and she was afraid that she wouldn't have any children. So she has sex with her father. So we can see, again, really great ungodliness where we continue to have this thread that gives us our examples, right? For our downfalls, our sinfulness, and how we get back up, which is exactly what God is looking for. The example of how that occurs, how we fall down and how we get back up. I'm going a little bit longer. And actually now I think I am done for today because I am going to get started with our goosebumps on time. And now I got started a little bit late, but now I've been here for about an hour. And it looks like I kept the signal the whole time, so they didn't care what I was talking about in this class, apparently. All right, so this is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am the teacher, and you are here in the spiritual classroom. On Wednesdays, we don't have the philosophical class. We'll be back here tomorrow with the philosophical class after this class, but in 5 minutes or so, I'll be online for our reading room, and we are finishing up our Goosebumps story. So hopefully I will see you in a few minutes. Thanks.